Okay, today we're learning Shabbat Daf Kuf Mem Vav. We're learning the Daf for Tisha B'Av. Today's shiur is sponsored by Jane Shapiro in honor of Nina Black, in honor of her birthday. Happy birthday from Jane, who loves sharing grandchildren and Daf Yomi together. We're now going to start from the Mishnah. We got to the Mishnah on Kuf Mem Vav. Shover Adam et hachavit le'echol hemenu grogrot ubavad shelo yitkaven lasot kli. You're allowed to break a barrel in order to take out figs from inside the barrel, as long as you're not intending to make a vessel. Okay, what's the issue here? So Rashi says you can use a knife or some sort of implement, we'll get to that in the Gemara, to get out the figs inside. De'ein mekalkel shum isur b'Shabbat. De'ein b'mekalkel shum isur b'Shabbat. Because what you're doing is you're destroying the cover in order to open it. So you can break, or you're destroying the barrel. Destroying the barrel is not a problem because it's what we call mekalkel. The Mefarshim jump on Rashi and say, what are you talking about? Mekalkel is patur only if, and it's patur, kol mekalkelim paturim. If you do a destructive act, it's breaking. That's breaking something, that's destructive. But that's only patur, meaning it's exempt, but you're not allowed to do it lechatchila. So you can't do something that's destructive. It's still forbidden. So there's a bit of a debate about what exactly is going on here. Tosfos says it's talking about mustiki. We're talking about a barrel that's already kind of falling apart. And therefore, it's not really considered breaking it because it's not really falling apart. Some people say that Rashi holds that ein binyan b'kelim. And therefore, there's no issue of binyan or stira. And then what you're doing is destructive, and it's not even a malacha at all. And mekalkel is only forbidden when the mekalkel is mekalkel while you're doing a malacha. Here, you're not actually doing a malacha because ein binyan b'kelim. The third answer is given by the Ran, which is that you're allowed to do mekalkel if it's l'tzorech Shabbat. And here you're trying to break the barrel in order to get wine to use on Shabbat, and therefore it would be allowed. You can't make a hole in the cover of a barrel. But the rabbis allow it. We're going to see exactly what we're talking about here. When we get to the Gemara, you can't make a hole in its side. Okay, we'll see. Is that referring to the megufa or is it referring to the chavit? If there was a hole in it, you also can't put wax on top of it. Okay, that's a problem because of mimarech. Okay, mipneshu mimarech, he's smoothing. It's like the problem with smoothing the leather. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Maaseh ba'lefnei Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai ba'arav v'amar chosheshani lo mechatat. Somebody did this and he said, I think that he's deserving a korban chatat, that he thinks that it would be forbidden midoraita to smear with wax the side where there's a hole in the barrel. Amar Rabbi Yoshai, Loshanu ela drusot. So the first issue becomes, what's the issue here with breaking this chavit? Why you're allowed to do it, as long as you're not intending to actually make a nice formed opening. You have to understand with kelim, the way they had a barrel in those days was the barrel was sealed shut. If you opened it, that was kind of making the kli, it was making the utensil useful. So this is in a case where it's sealed and you want to basically make a hole to allow the wine contents to get out. So now you're allowed to do this, right? And then we're not worried about it being a kli again, because either you're destroying the barrel or maybe ein binyan b'kelim. We'll see, that either which way it's somehow destructive. The question is why it's allowed entirely. But now Rabbi Yoshai says, Lo shanu ela drusot. We're talking about pressed figs. Pressed figs, we've learned about them before, and you need a knife to cut through it. So then we'll see why this is relevant. If it was full of loose figs, lo, it wouldn't be a problem. So now they say, mefuradot lo. Why? If they were loose, why wouldn't you be able to open the barrel to get to them? Meitive, there seems to contradict the following source. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel omer, mevi adam et hachavit shel yayin umetiz rosha b'sayif umenicha lefnei orchim b'Shabbat ve'eno choshesh. So they say, look, he says, you can bring a barrel, according to this Braita, Rashbag says, you can bring a barrel of wine. You can tilt it to the side, metiz rosha, you can cut off the top, the cover, you can remove with a knife, with a sword, umenicha lefnei orchim b'Shabbat, and you can put it in front of your guests on Shabbat, and you don't have to worry. So what do they answer? Ahi Rabbanan, matnitim Rabbi Nachemia. Two different approaches. We learned a while back about Shitat Rabbi Nechemia when it comes to moktzah, that you can only move an item for its generally used purpose. So if you take a knife now to cut a hole in your barrel or a sword, that is not generally used for those purposes. But if you're moving it anyway because you want to cut the figs that are inside because they're pressed together and you need a knife to cut them, then you can, once you're already moving the knife for that, you can then use the knife to cut the barrel. But if you don't need the knife to cut the figs, then you're not allowed to carry the knife, and that's Rabbi Nechemiah's opinion. So now the Gemara asks, why did Rabbi Yoshaya start saying, we're only talking about drusot and not mefuradot? He could have simply said, we're talking about mefuradot, loose figs, and we're talking according to the rabbis, the regular opinion of muktzah. So why did he have to say that we're talking about pressed figs and it's only Rabbi Nechemiah? So they say, right, look, he could have just said it's loose figs and it's the rabbis. So Amar Rava Matnitin Kashite, the Mishnah itself was difficult to him. My iria detani golgot, litne perot. Why did it say specifically figs? It could have just said fruit. The fact it talked about figs made it indicate that it had something unique to do with figs, and that would be pressed figs, and that would be, right, ala shmamina bidrusot, and therefore he says it's Rabbi Nechemiah. Tanichad. One Braita says, chotalot shel gorgot. We're now going to see another, so it's a machlokot between Rabbi Nechemiah and the rabbis. Tana, chotalot shel gorgot. If you have baskets of figs, vishal tmarim, and dates, matir umafkia bechotech. You can untie them, you can unbraid them, and you can cut the barrel, the basket, in order to get them out. V'tani idach, matir avalo mafkia v'lo chotech. You can only untie, but you can't unbraid or you can't cut. Lo kashya ha Rabbanan ha Rabbi Nechemiah. So the same thing, you could say untying you don't need a knife for, but once you need a knife, generally you don't use knives to cut open baskets, and therefore that's not what a knife is typically used for, and therefore Rabbi Nechemiah would forbid it, whereas the rabbis would say it's okay. Ditanya, and here we're going to see Rabbi Nechemiah's opinion, as it says in a Braita. Rabbi Nechemiah omer, afilu tarvad, afilu talit, afilu sakin, even a spoon, even a cloak, even a knife, these can only be used for their normal, average, typical use. They asked Rav Sheshet the following question: can you take a spear and use it to make a spout, to open the barrel, to get the wine out? B'shabta. Are you using this for making an opening, and then that would be forbidden? Or you're trying to just open it in order to show everybody how much wine there is, and therefore, right, to let people know there's a lot here and you could take. Is that the reason you're doing it? And then it would be allowed, because then you're not actually making a utensil out of it, but making an opening would be a problem. So the Gemara says, okay, it must be that you're doing it to take this spear would be like making an opening, a spout, and that's forbidden to make a spout. Meitive. Again, they bring a contradiction from the following source. We saw before that Rashbag said you can take a barrel and cut open the opening with a sword. There, it's allowed because you're basically using the knife to cut it open. Clearly there, you're trying to show ayin yafala or chim. It even said that there. So in this case, he wouldn't make a spout. You would take off the whole cover. And if you're not taking off the whole cover, then we can assume that you're using it to make a spout, and that's going to be problematic. You can't make a hole in the cover. Okay, they would cover their barrels with something made of like an earthenware vessel, also like an earthenware cover, and they would seal it shut. So now they say if you want to make a perforation in that, you can't do that. Okay, that's what the Mishnah said. According to Rabbi Yehuda, the rabbis allowed it. So Amar Rav Huna machloket lamala aval min hatzad divrei kol asur. The machloket is on top of the cover, the top part of the cover. But if you want to do it from the side, everyone agrees that it's forbidden. V'hainu dekatane, and that's why it says in the next line, the next words in the Mishnah are lo yikavenu mitzida. You can't lo yikavena. You can't make a hole in it. And it refers to what we were just referring to, the cover. You can't make a hole in it, and therefore only at the top do they have an argument about it. No, specifically the machloket is on its side. Clearly, if you're doing it on top of it, if you're making a hole in the top of the barrel, that's for sure fine. Okay, why is that? Because on the side, we're worried that maybe you're using it as a spout. At the top, and that's why everyone agrees on the side it's allowed. The machloket, right, one second, Rav Chisda Amar machloket min hatzad. Sorry, the machloket's on the side. Are you making a spout or not? But on the top, nobody makes a spout on the top, and therefore they would all agree it's mutar. So what about the words of the Mishnah that say, what do we do with that? That's talking about on the side of the barrel. You can't make a hole, because again, that's like making a spout. But on the side of the cover, one could do that. Tanu Rabbanan, ein nokvim nekev chadash b'Shabbat. You can make a new hole in a barrel, but if you want to add to a hole that was already there, then you can. So now they say, B'yesh omrim, however, there's another opinion that says, ein mosifim, that you can't even add to a previous existing hole. B'shavin, but they all agree, shenokvim nekev yashan l'chatchila. If you had a hole that you stopped up, that you fixed, and now you want to reopen it, that everyone agrees that you could do on Shabbat, because you're not creating anything new. It was already there. You just put in a stopper or something. Then you can open it up. B'tanakama. So now let's explain. Ma'ishna mi nekev chadash delo t'kamatakem pitra. When it comes to a nekev chadash, right? Remember Tanakama. They said you can't make a nekev chadash, but you can add to an existing hole. So why? If you can't make a nekev chadash, a new one, why is that? Because you're metaken. You're building something, so to speak. So pitra, metaken pitra, you're creating a spout. Osufenami kametaken pitra. When you add to it, you're also making a spout. So Amarabba, Rabba now says, let me explain some background, and that will make sense as to why you can add to an existing hole, but you can't create a new hole. It says, Dvar Torah, kol petach she'eno asoy lachnis ula'otzi ein petach. From the Torah, if you have an opening that you're only meant to take things out and not a two-way opening, right? A two-way opening would be you want to put things in and you want to take things out. And nobody's going to add stuff into this barrel through this hole. They're only taking things out. So from the Torah, this is for sure not a problem. The rabbis forbade this because they were worried that if we allow you to do this, you might make an opening in a chicken coop. Now, what's the problem with the chicken coop? There, you want to get air in so that the chickens can breathe. You also want to get the bad smell out of all of the feces and everything else. You want to get it out of there. But if you want to add, you can add. But there's no way in this little shatan golim you're going to make a bigger hole. Why is that? In other words, this is only an issue for creating a new hole, because then you might come to create one in a chicken coop. But in a chicken coop, you're for sure never going to add to an existing hole. Why? Mishum richsha, because we're worried the creepy crawlers will get in. You don't want a hole to be too big, because otherwise creatures will get in. We don't want creatures to get in. V'yesh omrim ein mosifin. Now let's go to the next line. Some people say you can't add at all. So why is that? How does that explained according to the chicken coop example? Zimnin delo takne mi'ikara va'ate la'arvuche be. According to their opinion, it could be even in the chicken coop. Maybe you made a hole that's really too small, and it's not even enough to get the air out or get the air in, like the smell out or the air in. So therefore, in that case, we'd be worried that you might come to add, and therefore they think even mosif is a problem, even for the, right, as a gzera, that you might come to do that in the chicken coop also. Darash Rav Nachman Mishum Rabbi Yochanan Lachaki Yesh Omrim, that you can't even add to a pre-existing hole. B'shavin shenokvim nekev yasham l'chatchila. They agree that you can open, this is the quote in the Braita, you can open a hole that was stopped up, l'chatchila, on Shabbat. Am Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, lo shanu ela b'makom ha'asur l'shamer. Depends where your hole is. He said, this is only if your hole is to protect. Aval l'chazek asur. But if it's strengthening, okay, what does this mean? If, let's say, there's a hole somewhere, okay, we're going to have to see exactly where this is, but somewhere in the barrel where it's not going to affect the barrel at all. It's just you want to stop up the hole because you're worried about the contents falling out. That's different from something that's mechazek the barrel, that's strengthening the barrel. So hechidami l'shamer, hechidami l'chazek. So let's just clarify again. If you stopped up a hole that was keeping the barrel intact, that's a real serious stopper. If you open that, that's like creating a new hole. But if you were just doing it to protect the contents from dripping out, then it's not a real hole. And then you can just open it up. It's not a real stopper, and then you can open it up without a problem. So hechidami l'shamer, hechidami l'chazek. What's considered protecting it and what's considered strengthening? Actually, l'shamer means to protect the barrel, but not that it's a supporting, right? It's like a beam in your house that's a supporting beam or not such a supporting beam, not a supporting beam. So here we have, what's l'shamer, what's l'chazek? We're going to have two different opinions. So Rav Chisda says, if it's above the level of the wine, then it's l'shamer, because then you don't really need the barrel to be so solid there. But l'mata min hayayin, if it's below the level of where the wine is, zeu l'chazek, that's to strengthen. But Rava Amar, no, l'mata min hayayin zeu nami zeu l'shamer. Under the wine line, that's still l'shamer, because again, you're protecting the barrel from the wine getting out. What's to strengthen? If it's all the way at the bottom of the barrel, where the dregs are, then already it's going to protect it. Amalei Abai l'Rava. Abai says to Rava, Tanya de Mesayalach, I'm going to bring a braita to prove what you're saying. Okay, now what is this proving? It's a little bit of a loose connection, but we're going to say that this is proving that when you have something that's a serious, that's stopping something seriously, right? That's closing off something that was previously open. There's situations where it could be as if it wasn't, it goes back, reverts back to its original state, as if it never had a hole before or never had an opening in this case. So what's the case? Bayit satum. If you have a sealed up house, yesh lo arba amot. What does this mean? If we want to split up a courtyard, generally, let's say we share a courtyard, my house opens up and your house opens up. We share all the shared spaces, all the spaces shared space, other than the 4 amot that are outside the entranceway of my house. So for example, if you have a bigger entranceway, you're going to have 4 amot outside that space. That's going to be, you're going to have a bigger space than mine, which is, let's say I have a narrower opening. It's just going to be 4 amot outside my narrow opening. So each of us have, so a bayit satum, yesh lo arba amot. If you sealed up your entranceway, you still get 4 amot into the chatzer, into the courtyard, where you had your opening originally. But paratz eptzimav, but if you took away the doorpost and everything, and it looks like it's just a regular wall, ein lo dalet amot. Then already you've sealed this up. It's like the barrel. It's as if it never existed. Okay, as if you never had an entrance there, and then you don't get the 4 amot. Bayit satum no matame kol svivav. Oh, by the way, another nafkamina would be if I have 2 entrances to the courtyard and you only have 1, then I'll have 4 amot in front of my 2 entrances, and you'll get the 4 amot in front of yours, and then we'll split up the rest of it, but I'll end up with more of the courtyard. Bayit satum eno matame kol svivav. Another halacha: if you have a grave, around the grave, 4 amot around the grave, we're going to say is tameh because we don't want people coming close to the grave. So within 4 amot, you're going to be impure. But a house, the tumah goes out through the entrances. And therefore, we don't say by the entrance where there is an entrance, yes, but not all around the house. So bayit satum, what if this house is sealed? They know matame kol svivav. We don't say the bayit is like a grave, and 4 amot around the house is going to be tameh, only through its entrance areas. But if it's satum, then there are no entrances, there's no windows, but it's as if it has windows, and therefore we're going to say that everything in the house, again, when it's a house, so everything in the house is tameh, but you don't go 4 amot around. It's not treated like a grave, it's treated like a house. But paratz eptzimav metameh kol svivav. But once you get rid of all the entranceways, then this house becomes like a grave because it has no way that the tumah gets out through a window and therefore a door, and therefore we're going to assume that the tumah has to go somewhere, so we're going to say it goes 4 amot around. It's treated like a grave. So again, you see that once you break the entranceways, you have no more doorposts or anything else, we're now going to say that it's treated as if it has no openings. Okay. Going back to, so that was just support Rava, who said that a nekev, if you have a hole and you seal it up and it's a nekev l'chazek, right, it's at the very bottom where it's a very important structural stopper, then already it's as if it never had a hole and you can't open that from the on Shabbat. Another question, guvta, if you want to take a reed that has kind of like a straw and you want to put it in order to get the wine out. Rav asar u'shmuel shaveh. Okay, Rav says it's forbidden, Shmuel allows this on Shabbat. Mechatech lechatchila d'kulei alma lo pligid asur. To cut the reed, of course everyone agrees it's forbidden. Ahadure kulei alma lo pligid shari. If it was already in there and it fell out, everyone agrees you can put it in. Ki pligid dechaticha v'lo matakna. Machloket is if it was cut, but it wasn't put in its place. Manda asar gazrinan dil ma'ate lemiftach lechatchila. Umanda share lo gazrinan. The one who says it's forbidden says we're worried that maybe you'll cut the reed we allow you to put a reed back in, if we allow you to put a reed in, or cut reed, and create this spout, then you might come to think that you could actually cut it on Shabbat and make a spout out of it. And the one who permits says, no, we're not worried about that. Everybody knows you can't cut a reed on Shabbat. Nobody's going to think that, and therefore he allows it. Now they say Kitanai. There's actually machloket Tanaim about what Rav and Shmuel disagree about. You can't cut a tube on Yom Tov, and obviously not on Shabbat. Nafla, again, this is a tube to make as a spout in your barrel. Nafla, if it fell, though, machzirin ota b'Shabbat. Ve'ein tzarich lomar b'Yom Tov. V'Rabbi Yoshia mekel. So here it says, you can cut it, you can't cut it, but if it fell out, you can put it back. Rabbi Yoshia is more lenient. Now, it's a little bit weird here. Rabbi Yoshia, ahaya, what's he referring to? Ilem ha'aresha, if he's lenient and says you could cut it on Shabbat, kamitake mana, what do you mean? That's making a utensil. You're of course not allowed to cut it. Ela seifa, if you want to say it's on the latter part, the Tanakama nami mishra kashare, and then you want to say the Tanakama allows it, that's also very strange. Because it doesn't make sense that he's allowing the second part, because Tanakama already said it was allowed. If it's already cut, you can put it back in, right? In other words, if it was already in there and it fell out, you could put it back in. So obviously he's not being lenient about that, because it could be, but he would agree with Tanakama. So, and it seems clear they're disagreeing. Ela, what must be their disagreement, and what is he lenient about? Dechaticha v'lo matakna, where it was cut already, but it wasn't put in its place. Ika benayu, that's the machloket. Mar savar gazlina, no mar savar lo gazlina. Okay, so Rabbi Yoshia is mekel, and he says, we're not worried. If it's already cut, we allow you to put it back. We allow you to put it in. And Tanakama says, no, if it was cut but never put in, you can't put it in l'chatchila on Shabbat, because you might come to think that you can make a spout. So here we see machloket Tanaim exactly like the machloket between Rav and Shmuel. Darish Rav Shisha b'rei Rav Idi mishmei Rabbi Yochanan l'chak Rabbi Yoshia that were more lenient. V'im hayta nekuva. If it was, now we're going to get back to the wax, sealing with wax that we saw in the Mishnah. So sealing with wax is a problem. Mishcha Rav Asar Ushmol Shari, right? Wax is a problem because we're worried about memachek. It's like smoothing it out. But now the machloket is what about oil? Rav Asar Ushmol Shari. Okay, Rav forbids, Shmuel permits. Again, we see a machloket between them. Manda Asar Gazlina Mishum Shava, Manda Shari Lo Gazlina, right? Do we forbid oil because you might come to put wax, or do we say no, oil is from the wax, we're not worried? Amalei Rav Shmuel bar Rav Chana le Rav Yosef. Beferish Amar la Mishmei de Rav Mishcha Shari. But I heard you say explicitly that Rav said it's allowed. And here we said before, Shmuel and Rav disagree, and Rav says it's forbidden. But I heard Rav say it's actually allowed. Amar Tavut Rishba. Okay, this is it's either he's the head, Tavut is his name, and Rishba is either he was a hunter or he was the Rosh Beit Av Beit Din. Okay, he was the head of the Beit Din, or Rosh Beit Av or something like that. He was the head of a family. Tavut Rishba, sorry, I said Av Beit Din, I didn't mean that. I meant Rosh Beit Av, like the head of a family, or he was a hunter. Amar Shmuel, he said the name of Shmuel, Hai Tarfa da Asa Asur. You can't take a branch, a myrtle branch, and put that in as a spout. My time, why? Rav Yemar Midifti Amal Gzera Mishum Marzev. Again, we're worried if we allow you to make a spout with that, you might come to make a spout with a regular spout, which is not allowed. Rav Ashi Amar Gzera Shema Yiktom. We're worried that you might come to cut a myrtle branch, and therefore to make another spout. You might come to cut another one. My benai, what's the difference between them? Ika benayu de katimu manche. Let's say you have a lot of myrtle branches in front of you, then we would allow it because we're not worried you might come to cut them. Whereas we'd still be worried, maybe you'll learn from here that one can make a spout. Beis Sadya. Okay, with this we'll finish for today. We'll finish just to the Mishnah. I want to keep it short because there's an extra daf you'd have to squeeze in. And we'll start on Friday from the Mishnah. Beis Sadya. If you have these felt cloths, Rav Asar Ushmol Shari. Rav forbids you to carry them and Shmuel permits them. We're moving a little bit topics here, but we're in the middle of a bunch of things that Rav and Shmuel disagreed about, and maybe misunderstandings about who actually said what. Because in the last case, we just said that Rav actually permitted it, and it wasn't true that he disagreed with Shmuel. Here also, we're going to see maybe it's not so clear that Rav forbade this. Birakin kulei lo pligi. Deshari, everybody agrees that in soft cloths, it's not a problem. Because soft cloths we use for all sorts of things, and therefore the issue here becomes muktzah. Can you carry these things? So it seems like soft cloths for sure are not a problem. And what they would do with, by the way, what we're talking about is using these cloths to sit on or to lie down on. So for sure, soft ones are not a problem because people carry soft cloths all the time. They're usable for other things. Rashi says, "Shedarkan litchamem b'hem." People normally warm up. It's like a warm blanket, fleece. So Bikashin to use a hard one, nobody would use that. That's unpleasant to use. The question is something in between hard and soft. The one who's forbid says it looks like it's a burden. You're carrying something that's burden, right? It's not something you normally use. The one who permits says, no, it doesn't look like you're carrying a burden. But now we're going to say, and there's an interesting way to end our daf, especially on learning for Tisha B'Av. What Rav says was not beferish itmar. He didn't actually say it. People saw him doing something, and they inferred from there something else. They derived it from the following story. He got into a town, and in the Beit Midrash, there wasn't enough space for everyone. He went out into the Carmelite because there wasn't enough space. So they brought him this beisadya, this piece of felt that was in between, not hard, not soft, to sit on, lo yativ, and he wasn't willing to sit on it. Now, mandachaza savar mishum de beisadya asul. The people who saw he wasn't sitting on it said, oh, it must be because he thinks it's forbidden. Velohi, but in fact, it's not true. Rav achruze machriz, because Rav was teaching, because Rav explicitly taught in another situation, beisadya shari, that you can actually move them. So therefore, it can't possibly be that's what it was. So why didn't he sit on the mat that they gave him or the cloth? Mishum kvod rabotenu lo yashav alav. Because, what was the issue? Rashi says, everyone else was sitting on the ground, including some other rabbis that were there. And he said, it's not appropriate that I should be sitting on a cloth and they should be sitting on the ground. And Mishum kvod rabotenu, and who were these rabbis? Rav Kahana and Rav Asi. These were the rabbis, and out of respect for them, he wouldn't sit on the cloth. Now, why is this relevant for the Churban? Well, a lot of what we talk about the Churban Abayit was because of Sinat Chinam, and even between Talmidei Chachamim, and baseless hatred, and lack of respect, and not listening to other people, and not hearing the opinions of other people. And here, we had a daf full of different opinions. Number one, arguments going on, but arguments are always done out of respect. And when one is, and number one, I think we have the issue here of Rav, who is teaching to the other rabbis, and he was a very prominent rabbi and the most prominent of his generation, and yet he was careful to accord respect to other rabbis. That's number one. Number two, the other thing you learn here is the importance of communication, and you see here that they assumed from what he did without asking him. Right? It's important to ask when you don't understand something or you're not sure, or you see, and you just jump to conclusions. It's very important never to jump to conclusions, to be as communicative as possible. And again, it prevents sinat chinam in many situations, because if you understand properly what's going on, then you will come not to end up with disagreements and arguments, etc. So with this, we end for today, and we'll pick up, as I said, from the Mishnah on Friday morning. And if you're fasting, if it's still before the fast, have a good fast. Otherwise, after. So it should be your fast should have had lots of good, be a meaningful fast.